And I'm now delighted to reintroduce Pete Shaw from the University of Southampton, who's going to chair a panel discussion on employability and entrepreneurship and implementation. And we're delighted to be joined for the panel by Professor Carolyn Roberts, consultant to Innovate UK, the UK's innovation agency, and formerly specialist with the UK Knowledge Transfer Network. Would you like to say hello, Carolyn, before I introduce Joe? Check she's there.
Hi, everybody.
Hello, Carolyn.
Yeah, I'm
brilliant
delighted to be here as well. And it's brought back some memories because I was actually on the very first benchmarking panel.
Fantastic.
I can't even remember when that was.
Fantastic. And our other panel member is Joe Jackson, who's Managing Director of Jackson Remediation. Joe, would you like to say hello?
Hello.
Hello, Joe. Lovely. And thank you so much for joining us. So
Pleasure.
I'll hand over to you, Pete, now to chair the panel.
Right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Now, the idea of this panel is basically just to explore some of the things we've talked about, particularly on employability and entrepreneurship. So the way that we'll work this is that I'll begin by throwing a couple of real curveballs towards Carolyn and Joe, and then we've got an opportunity for people to ask questions. Now, thankfully, this is all some kind of great plan. Carolyn's already preempted one of the questions I was going to ask. So I'm going to lead with two questions for Joe and Carolyn, just to develop ideas and see really how we might implement some of the ideas that are being put forward, some of the needs that we need to meet from the revision of the benchmarks. So I'd like to start off by thinking about a practical part of this. Now, if we think of a student's experience in higher education, then building in entrepreneurship and employability activity will take time and effort for them and for the staff. I'd like your views, Carolyn and Joe, about how much do we need and maybe where we might deliver that. So, what kind of things would you envisage, how much effort and resource would be needed to get people to the right standard and equip them with the right skills? We do this alphabetically, maybe Carolyn first and then Joe, and we'll swap over for the second question.
Okay, thank you. Well, what a question. I'm not sure I can answer it directly because there's never enough, is there? But the point is, the key skills that I think are required would accord very much with the survey results that we heard in the previous session. But there's a couple of things I want to emphasize about that. One is that it's really, really important that people have a good grasp of the actual discipline that they're dealing with. So I'm not suggesting for a minute that sustainability and diversity and so on are add-ons. They're not, they're integral. But I can't tell you how many times I've come across people who are perhaps pitching for money to start a business, and they and we're an environmental science organization, the IES, and they come to the business with an environmental type proposition and they haven't the faintest conception about environmental science. So it's actually really important that people do understand their discipline at a high level, and they have critical skills in relation to the knowledge of that discipline. So that's the first thing I would say. And the second thing I want to add to that is I mentioned that these kind of skills have to be embedded. So they're not, I don't regard them, Pete, as something that you kind of have to lever in and lever something else out to get them in. I think one of the best ways that these the relevant kind of skills that can be embedded is that people undertake plenty of project work, that they develop those skills, those attributes of initiative and confidence and so on by doing projects which may or may not be with employers, but they certainly have, they have the opportunity to develop things such as their curiosity, persistence, risk-taking, confidence underpinned with realism, of course, every time they're doing a project, whether or not it's with an employer. Then one final thing I would say, I do think there are certain basic issues about working with employers that maybe have to be addressed in higher education now and may not have been in the past, may not have been needed in the past, because just to give you an example, I was external examining at an institution of which there is at least one person here on today, and they were asked to set up some kind of link with an employer, and I was provided with some examples of the student work that had gone on with this, and some young woman actually had written to, I think it was the head of Marks and Spencer's, and started off, "Hi Dave," in her letter. Now, you know, that's not going to go down well. So there are some of these basic, very basic things that maybe just need, you know, a handout to explain how to do it. Not a lot of time. All these, the rest of the skills, I think, can be, you know, very well taught within the context of the discipline.
Okay, thanks very much, Carolyn. A quick response for me. I'm supposed to be moderating, but I can't keep out of this. I agree entirely about the projects, and from my personal view, something that really stands out about project work is that it's owned by the students.
Mm-hmm.
So they're doing it for them, not to make us happy. So the attributes and the confidence and such like you just described, I think are really, really important for this. And they stem from that fact that they're doing it for themselves and owning the work. Joe, have you got anything to add to that, or any contrasting perspective?
Carolyn, that was brilliant. I think I agree with everything you've said. I think the fundamental, and something I've often relied upon in my career, is kind of going back to first principles about what you know. And I think equally important is being able to clearly identify what you don't know,
Yeah.
you know, and sort of go and being able to put your hands up and saying, "I'm not sure," is a really powerful, you know, and help is a really powerful thing to be able to say and do. And I think what that also requires is this that we talk about ownership here. I've made a couple of notes about these embedded skills. The curiosity around problem solving and the ownership of a problem, but being able to be open-minded enough to ask for help and know when you need help and know what you don't know. I was a very proud MSc graduate from Imperial College a long time ago, and Jesus, I thought I knew everything. I knew nothing. but you know, if you can remain curious and have you know, some of the qualities I look for in people is that curiosity, and it's also the grit and determination to get to the bottom of these issues. And I think before we maybe move on, something we just touching on some of the other comments that were made in the previous presentation. The ability to communicate is absolutely fundamental. I've worked with lots of people who've got all the answers in their head, but have no ability to get them out of their head, and more importantly, enact them. And another skill associated with that is the ability to manage. And if you can't communicate clearly, if you're unable to set people a simple task as you go up the career ladder, all you're going to do is be stuck in your lane for your whole career. Whereas you may have more impact, be able to bring people with you on the journey and develop this entrepreneurial approach if you're able to not just communicate, but enthuse people with what it is that you're doing. And I think one of the challenges we have in this, the Earth Environmental Sciences and Studies space, is there are so many hard sciences in there. There's geology, hydrogeology, chemistry, and nobody's an expert in all of it. And the temptation is to say, okay, I'm kind of jack of all trades, master of none. But quite the opposite. You know, what you know and what you need to know is the limitation of your own knowledge, and be in a framework, which is something that employers should be there to do, that says, okay, if you've got that tricky problem, here's where to go. And I've built, if you like, my entire career by saying I don't know, but I'll find someone who does know. And having a bit of humility to do that is quite important. That's my bit.
I'd agree entirely. I should write that down. And then a question that wasn't on my list, but picking up on this theme of embedding skills into the curriculum. So, making sure that employability and entrepreneurship is connected with the subject. I wonder if you, one or both of you, could comment about co-curricular learning as well. So how do you see that fitting in with delivering entrepreneurship and employability in tandem with formal learning?
Can you say a bit more, Pete, about what you mean by co-curricular?
I was thinking about things that where we have student engagement, enactors, sustainability initiatives. So something which is associated with environment and sustainability, but not delivered within the framework of formal learning.
Well, I would say, I think if ever I'm looking at an application and somebody is doing something outside of the course that gives them an opportunity to showcase their attitude as much as anything, it's hugely attractive. And secondarily, I mean, I had the benefit of doing my undergraduate and postgrad thesis in industry, and that was brilliant. It probably didn't give me the best marks in a sense, but it gave me a real, a bit of a blooding in what it means to be in the office at 9 o'clock. and have to stay there until 5 o'clock, for goodness sake, So I think things like that are important, and in terms of how that can be embedded, I think what you talk about, the project work, the ability to present your projects, and again, if we go back to the entrepreneurship, there's never been anybody got any funding on Dragon's Den by sort of mumbling into their, tea.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because the co-curriculum, I wanted to see, Pete, how far out you draw the boundary. So you were talking about people working on, say, sustainability initiatives within the university, but I would equally include, somebody's running the debating society, or they're a sports woman or man. Perish the thought in my case, but they like doing something, they're passionate about it, they're organizing it, they're taking leadership roles in doing it, or they've organized an expedition for their friends, even if it's only the Lake District or the north of Scotland. I say only a UK based thing or an international one. Great, those kind of things are great, but I think the institution itself sets the context in which those co-curricular activities take place. Because if the university is committed to developing the whole person, it's a kind of old-fashioned phrase, but allowing students to develop some of these skills which are need repetition. It's not that one project doesn't do it. You need leadership skills have to come from elsewhere as well. Then they need to, the university as a whole, not just individual departments, the university as a whole needs to provide some of those activities and some of that space in which students can try, can persevere, can make mistakes as well, without too much damage. I think all of those things are important. So co-curricular activity, yes, absolutely.
I think it's an interesting point, because we switched from using co-curricular from extracurricular to co-curricular, but actually the more you think about it, the more fuzzy the boundaries between the two.
Yes.
We are getting some questions coming through, so maybe it's time for me to not ask questions and throw over to some of the chat. First one has come from Jackie. So this is really about whether we develop communication skills through using more time and effort in the curriculum and accepting that some knowledge is developed after graduation. Do you think that is the right way around to do things? So a little bit more in communication and then build up the knowledge base afterwards?
I think it's, the first thing I would say is, not everybody's comfortable with public speaking, and that's fine. However, the ability to share the fruits of your work is essential. If you can't, be it written, be it through a PowerPoint presentation, whatever it might be, there are lots of forms of communication that don't require people to stand up and be, you know, bullish redheads like myself, you know. So I think there is room for that. In terms of how that can be developed, it definitely can be. And I think one of the things I wanted to say is that one of the skills that is really important from people with academic backgrounds coming into industry is the ability to put a written argument together. Because fundamentally, that is the thing that very often your professional indemnity is going to hang off. It's not, well, on the day you said this, that, or the other. It's a case of, well, I've given some succinct advice with appropriate caveats, and I've shown my work in. So I think there is a level of communication that, you know, we shouldn't say if people are introverts that they you know, cannot be effective. That's not the case at all. What I have seen though, and is something that industry needs to look at, and maybe academia can help with, is that there's almost an assumption, well, there certainly was an assumption 20 years ago, you're a good engineer, you're a good scientist, therefore you must go into management. Therefore you must manage a team of people. And those two things aren't necessarily true. You know, and there have been companies that have said, well, there's technical routes or there's management routes, and I think that's quite successful. So in terms of what we can embed, I think there are lots of opportunities for people to refine those skills, but the fundamental has to be about the written word, in my opinion.
Yeah, can I just again take a step back a little bit? I think personally, I feel that there's a difference between entrepreneurship and employability. Now, to me, employability is about your acceptability, often within a large organization. And I noticed in your survey, most of the respondents in the survey were from large organizations, and they tended to favor employability because a lot of that is about fitting in and working with others. Now, to me, entrepreneurship is more like the Dragon's Den situation. It's not completely different, but it's more like an ability to take an idea yourself and push it forward as an individual, or perhaps, you know, with a partner or something like that, in a way that's logical and will make it stand by itself, perhaps. Now, observation I would just make is that sometimes within large organizations, people who deal with human resources are quite nervous about entrepreneurship because you can't have hundreds of people pushing different agendas in a large organization. You've got to have some people who are able to fit in. Now, later on in their careers, maybe they might, you know, branch out, work for themselves, or become able to take big decisions within major companies. But I think that difference, that separation is worth, you know, something worth just thinking about. So I suppose I'm not surprised that the emphasis was on employability, not entrepreneurship. But if you wanted guidance on entrepreneurship, as was said earlier, I mean, I do quite a bit of work for Innovate UK, which is the government's innovation agency. And a lot of that is about tech innovation. And I work on environmental technologies. Now, if people are interested, if you have a look at the programs of work that they fund, they basically give grant support to consortia usually, but sometimes single organizations, companies, universities, and so on, for particular projects. And just picking up what Joe said about structuring an argument, the application forms for these competitions I think are a very good discipline in terms of the structure of making a case for a project. You know, they start off with the general context, then what's the innovation, and then who's the team that's going to work on this, how are you going to work, what's the impact going to be, what's it going to cost. So that gives a structure to an explanation, and I think is can be really helpful. And I've actually worked with older people, business leaders, looking at that structure for them to help, not necessarily to make grant applications themselves, but to help them structure their ideas, because often people and students as well, I know from my own teaching experience, they come with a mass of ideas, you know, they're bubbling out all over the place. And you've got to help them get them into some sort of structure. And for entrepreneurship, developing something new from start to finish, persisting with it, taking it forward to a conclusion, doesn't have to be a financial conclusion. I'm seeing that Diane's flagged up a note saying it could be a social enterprise, cultural enterprise, but the discipline of putting it into that kind of form, I think, is very helpful. I don't know if you'd agree with that, Joe. I don't know whether your company's ever applied for Innovate UK funding.
We need a conversation, Carolyn. I think, and funnily enough, I've mentioned to Adam in the past, I think that the IES maybe has a role to play in terms of some sort of incubator for these, this talent and these ideas that are bubbling up, because it does need formalization. And, I think what must be done, and I think what is absolutely essential to all the points that are being made here, is we can't put people off. We can't say, oh, it's difficult, all this sort of thing. The environmental world is very much in the spotlight. Sustainability, environmental science is very much in the spotlight. It is back when I was entering into the employability, it was hugely overprescribed, and you had to start. You had to start at the bottom, and it was hard bloody work, and you had to work in fairly administrative roles for quite a long time, and it's tough. It is tough, but what we mustn't do, and I think I'm really confused by everything that's being said today. What strikes me is that there is an understanding here that there is potential within people, that we need to help young people or people in further education, higher education, actually get some of this stuff out there. Because with the greatest respect, well, I'll say it regarding myself, not anyone else in the call, I'm not going to solve climate change. It won't be me, but it'd be lovely to think that, the work that we're all trying to look at here is going to address the significant issues of our time. But we have to encourage people to do that. And, I don't understand what makes graduates tick. I really don't. I think the point that Diane made is hugely important. Once upon a time, it was easy. You wanted a job with a car. Maybe now it's not. People want a purpose. People want to make a difference. People are prepared to write to the MD of Marks and Spencer's and call him Dave. It's completely different, and it's no bad thing if it's pointed in the right direction.
Excellent. We've probably got enough questions and enough material here to discuss for about an hour, but I've got my one eye on the clock. Maybe if we can just pick up on one question, and apologies to anyone who's asked a question and we don't have time to cover it. But the first one up next is actually from Adam. Can entrepreneurial skills be taught, or are they more about personal characteristics? Carolyn, do you want to go first?
Well, I think it's actually about opening up a space in which people can develop them themselves and giving them some kind of idea about what you want the endpoint to be. I don't think you sit down with a PowerPoint and say, well, this is what entrepreneurial activity is, and this is how you do it. You open up a space, and that's why I'm so keen on project work. And actually, just to come back to, one of the things that when I was an academic and people produced one book in particular on sustainability within the curriculum, but people said things like, well, we don't know anything about this. I mean, actually, you do. Academics are pretty good, actually, in our sphere. In my experience, my very recent experience, I was an impact assessor for the REF, for the Earth and Environmental Sciences. Academics are very good, actually, in our discipline at identifying targets and things with real impact, as Joe was saying. Now, we don't expect all of our students to be solving climate change. Some of the people who put in for the REF this time round, academics in our area, were indeed doing that. But you don't all have to be doing that. But some people can be, people have the skills, the academics do have the skills themselves, whether they know it or not. And they're generating themselves by doing it, not by sitting down with a set of PowerPoint slides, is my opinion. What do you think, Joe?
You got a minute?
I think you're absolutely right. I think it's about creating a space. I think that people need a nudge occasionally. I've employed some people who have been absolutely brilliant, but probably their own worst enemies. And just coming back to some of these, again, it's about giving space for people, giving people time to be expressive, to explore what they're after. Nobody can do this stuff unless there is a real passion and that needs to be supported. And bearing in mind, we're not talking about people on trust funds here. We're talking about people that are in full-time, grinding employment, ultimately, that need to have these skills that they can go and do things with at a later date. So I agree with you. I think it's about making the space. Can it be taught? Not particularly, but I think there are elements around communication skills and things that can be taught, and there's certainly ways that people can build confidence in their ability to talk. But I'm going to come right back to the beginning and say it's really, really easy to talk about things you know about. I can talk about the 2003 English World Cup winning rugby team with great authority, and I won't stammer, I won't stutter, because it's something I know about. And I think that comes back to having the grounding that we started about, and being able to say, this I know because I've learned it at a good university, and I don't know this.
Yeah.
I think that's a great.
That's brilliant. I'm terribly sorry, but I have to be a bossy chair and cut in now, because that was absolutely fantastic. But we are out of time, I'm afraid. But there are lots of questions in the chat, so if you wouldn't mind, answering the questions in the chat, including about referring to Welsh successes in rugby as well, would be very, very positive. So
I'll pass
Jackie,
on that one, Liz.
thank you, Jackie. I'll keep my concluding remarks very brief, so you've got a bit of wriggle room. So if I could just and thank you so much to Pete, Joe and Carolyn. That was absolutely fascinating. So please do take the opportunity to answer questions in the chat.